We're going to talk about transfers in the budget, which are being recorded as expenses, which is against GAAP and GASB uh, policy. So in 2025, we have a couple issues here. I'm going to show you the simple ones, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. These transfers are counted as department expenses for the manager's budget, which I'm displaying right now, which is part of the fund, general fund in the spending section. This is what the manager is going to spend this year in 2025, intending to spend $2,275,250. But in that number is a couple $30,000 that is identified as a transfer. So it's included in the 2,275,000. And if you look at 2021 in actuals, they transferred $120,000. So the way that this is presented in the budget inflates our operational expenses in 2021 by 120,000, and for 2025 it's going to inflate the budget by $30,000. And if you look at the budget that they're presenting and advertising, the overall general fund budget is $68,000 over budgeted over actual revenue. So this would alleviate that whole problem. But GASB requires us to transfer these to transfers to be classified as other financing sources. So this is what this documentary is going to talk about. And it's outlined in the Governmental Accounting Standards Board GASB Statement number 34, which you can read. You can go online and find it. Our accounting people should be aware of it, but it doesn't seem that they are. So where did the 30,000 go? Well, here it is in the Exeter Promenade Fund number 12. And you can see it coming into the revenue section as $30,000. And what this should be classified is coming in as other financing from the general fund. But the problem here is really that it shows up again as an expense. It's reported here in the expense line in the blue box, Fund 12, reported as an expense twice. You saw it once in the administration manager section of the general fund, and here it is again in the Promenade Fund. Here's another example. This is the police department administration spending budget, also part of the general fund. And what you'll see is that we have $50,000 being transferred out. And again, this is counted as a departmental expense. It's part of the $2,963,403 that they're planning on spending for police administration. And again, presenting the transfers this way inflates the police administration spending budget by $50,000 for 2025. Again, GASB standards require transfers to be classified as other financing sources. So this would be above the spending line. It would be in the revenue section showing it as a transfer out, as it's outlined in the Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement number 34. So where did this $50,000 go? Well, let's take a look. Here it is showing up in the equipment fund in the revenue section, just like the other department. And this money is likely the funds to enhance the shooting range on Mascaro-owned land. And if it is for the shooting range project, it's in this capital spending of $246,000 in the blue box for 2025. And again, recording it in the police spending budget in the general fund and reported again as an expense here in the equipment fund. So counting it twice as an expense. But also, regardless of how it's used in this fund, it will be accounted for as an expense this year, or it will remain in the ending balance as a cash asset. If it is spent this year, again, it will be showing it as an expense twice in our funds. And if it's not spent, if the project is delayed or canceled, it'll remain in this fund as an asset and show in the general fund as a operating expense, which is also incorrect. So what does this all mean? Well, let's take a look at a couple key points. There's an overstatement of expenses. Transfers out to other funds have been included as part of total expenses. I've shown you that. And this practice overstates expenses and creates a misleading picture of the organization's budget. Most people that looked at that would assume that those are legitimate expenses, not understanding that they actually went to another fund where they were reported a second time as expenses. Overstating our spending. Number two, misclassification of these transfers. It's clear these transfers are not operational expenses, but financial movements between funds. So including these transfers in the expense line leads to double counting, since they may already appear elsewhere in financial statements. And we take a look at the historical practice. You saw the $120,000 that is now an actual expense according to the budget document. And this misclassification has been going on for years. And we're talking about not thousands of dollars, but we're talking about millions of dollars. So as a result of this, expenses have been overstated consistently, creating a distorted financial baseline. So when we look at the budget information historically, we look at spending, and there's many different ways depending on the behavior of the expense. It might be bumped up by annual inflation that's expected. It might be bumped up by an average increase in spending. But whatever method is used, it's clear that we're over-reporting expenses, so it leads to creating budgets that are fictitious in nature, predicting what our expenses will be. For example, the 2025 budget, I showed you the $30,000 transfer. It's included under expenses. But when you add up the transfers in this one department, just the manager's department from 2020 to 2025, we overinflated the budget by $312,000. Those are expenses that were used to calculate what reserves would have to be transferred to the general fund and if we had to raise taxes or not. So my recommendations are that transfers should not be categorized as expenses, and this is also stated in GASB statement number 34. They need to report separately to reflect accurate financials, and by doing so, the actual operating expenses and financial position will be more transparent. Well, what else is there? Well, how about the issues with treating transfers as expenses? Number one, the lack of clarity. Combining transfers and expenses obscures the true cost of running the organization. It overstates the true cost dramatically over time. Stakeholders, and let me define that. The stakeholders are you and I, the taxpayer, the resident. And it leads us to believe that the organization is spending more than it actually is. There's a lot of reasons why they might want to do that, because I think they're aware of it. They just didn't want us to know. So number two, budgeting and decision-making impact. So if we overstate expenses, this could lead to improper budgeting decisions like I described earlier. It might justify higher funding requests or changes in resource allocations that aren't necessary. And I believe that's true. It's going to happen in this budget. It happened last year when they decided they had to raise taxes by 24%. And if we go back to that budget and analyze the incorrect spending statements, I think we'll find out that we didn't require a 24% increase. I don't believe we need a 0.75 million increase for next year. So it's something to consider. So accountability and reporting, including transfers and expenses, violates standard accounting principles. And we're talking about GAAP and GASB. And such practices will raise questions about transparency and accuracy in financial reporting. I've been complaining about this for years. We have no transparency. There is no accuracy in our financial reporting. That's why they kicked me out of the Board of Supervisors, because I was focusing on this and bringing it to everyone's attention. You don't hear anything about this anymore except from me. So recommendations. Reclassify these transfers. We need to go back and record transfers separately from operational expenses. And we need to use clear labels to indicate financial movements between funds. We need to revise historical reports, adjust prior year's reports to remove transfers from the expense totals. The expenses are overstated. Provide corrected figures to the stakeholders to rebuild our trust. And adopt the standard practices. Align with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, and Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB frameworks to avoid similar issues in the future. What about this compliance with GASB? Because we are a governmental body and we have to follow a specific framework stated in the Governmental Accounting Standards Board principles. And believe it or not, it emphasizes fund accounting and transparency. Here's how the municipal government context influences the analysis and recommendations. First of all, key differences in the municipal government context. Number one, fund accounting basics. Local governments operate under a fund accounting system, where separate funds are used to track resources earmarked for specific purposes. Therefore, we have the general fund, we have special revenue funds, we have capital projects funds, we have the apparatus fund, the equipment fund. Transfers between these funds are common, but must be reported properly to avoid inflating operational expenses, which I've shown you is happening. Number two, transparency requirements. Governments have a heightened obligation to provide clear and transparent financial reports for accountability to taxpayers, elected officials, and oversight bodies. GASB, statement number 34, requires this. And yet I can tell you as a taxpayer, and definitely as an elected official, I fought very hard to get transparency, but I still could not get financial information that I wanted. They hide it. They refuse to provide it. And I think part of it is because the finance people are not qualified for the job that they're asked to do. And the misclassification of transfers can be seen as misleading and undermine public trust. And I believe that's happening because we've talked about it many, many times, and they just ignore it. They won't even comment about it. And nothing comes out of that black hole called finance. We don't even know what the results were of how what RHM did running our banquet business. Did we make money? Did they make money? Certainly we didn't. In fact, we lost money. It cost us $300,000 so that RHM could make $1 million. Number three, compliance with GASB standards. GASB standards require transfers to be classified as other financing sources, separate from operating revenues and expenditures. These transfers are not identified as something other than operating revenues, and they're certainly not properly classified because they're classified as expenditures. They have to be separate. Treating transfers as operational expenses or revenue violates the principles and can lead to audit findings or non-compliant issues. So I'm asking the question also, where was Maley? Where was Herbine? Where were these other two audit firms that we recently had not being aware of this? And in fact, the 2023 audit report isn't completed. Although our board has voted to accept it, the partners of the audit firm have not signed off on it as of today of this documentary. So what's going on? The number four, budgeting requirements. Municipal budgets are often legally binding, requiring strict adherence to approved allocations. And that's the case here. Okay, because overstated expenses could mislead decision makers and violate the local budget laws. Well, this is very true. And I'll tell you that our board, and in particular, in my opinion, our solicitor, has the attitude that they can do whatever they want to do. They don't have to answer our questions because, as far as they're concerned, everything they do is legal until someone in the public takes them in court and proves that it's not that it's illegal. And that's the philosophy of our solicitor. So they don't care what they do. They're just very insensitive to our concerns about being able to understand the finances. And this documentary proves what the problem is that we're facing right now. Public accountability. Municipal financial practices are subject to public scrutiny, often with legal and ethical implications. Errors like double counting transfers could raise concerns about financial mismanagement. Now, you know, if you followed me as a supervisor, I continued to call on a regular basis for forensic audits, and they just shot me down. They refused to even put it on the agenda as a discussion. They refused to do it. And this is a real problem. This should tell us, this should be the warning sign. This is like the canary in the coal mine. Something is not right about our financial reporting and our finances. And I hope that the people in this township wake up. I mean, I don't think there's going to be any legal action because we're too meek to do that. We refuse to challenge our government as far as what they're doing. And the only way that we're going to get any tread on this is by you, the citizen, taking this documentary and sending it to the Attorney General, sending it to the Auditor General, who both are now Republicans. And hopefully they'll see what's wrong with this and they'll investigate our township and its supervisors. This is what we really need to happen. Now, they paid me a lot of money to promise not to sue them. And I have to leave it up to you now. I'm giving you the information that you need to actually hold them accountable for what's going on. Don't disappoint me, and don't disappoint yourselves, because if you do, the cost of living in this township is just going to go higher and higher and higher. In 2020, our budget was $12 million. With the introduction of George Bell and his cohorts and our solicitor, in my opinion, this year's budget is close to 17 for 2025 is close to 17 million, $4 million in roughly 4 years, $1 million a year. That's what we're looking at. So I'm going to be posting this on X, formerly Twitter. You can find me on Twitter @ Dave H. Hughes. That's Dave, D-A-V, H, Hughes, H-U-G-H-E-S, with the @ in the front. Please watch this. It'll be posted on Nextdoor, but more than likely there'll be complaints from probably even our officials here in Exeter that usually end up forcing Nextdoor to hide my posts. It will also be on my Facebook post, unless they take that down as well. Thank you for listening to my documentary, and thank you.